I think we got the mic working now. Everybody hear me okay? Great. I'm Jim Hamilton, Professor of Economics at UCSD, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to our fall session of the UCSD Economics Roundtable. We got a great event for today, but first I want to call your attention to a few of the things that are coming up. The Economics Department at UCSD is celebrating its 60th year in operation this year. And we've scheduled an event to look back at what we've accomplished in our first 60 years and where we're heading next. That will be right here in the Faculty Club on Friday afternoon, October 25th. I think most of you have received some information about that. If you haven't, please email either me or Jay, and we'll get that information to you. And we have another great year in planning for 2025. I don't know who's going to win the election, but I know whoever does, China is going to be front and center in terms of the world economy and U.S. policy. The Peterson Institute for International Economics is one of the leading nonpartisan research organizations that follows issues like this. We're very fortunate to have the president of the Peterson Institute, Adam Posen, who's going to be here talking about, is the end of the Chinese miracle the start of more trouble? That'll be right here in the Faculty Club on Monday, February 7th. And the cost of housing is another issue that I know is going to be discussed in terms of policy, both in San Diego and in California, and we're seeing in the election now nationally as well. And Timothy McQuaid of Berkeley is one of the nation's leading researchers on real estate economics. We're so happy that Tim has agreed to visit us on Wednesday, June 11th, to talk about the housing affordability crisis and possible solutions. We also have some other fantastic speakers in mind for the second half of 2025. I'll tell you more about them when we get together again in February. So let me take this opportunity to thank our steering committee who helps plan our roundtable events: Isaac Martin, Stanley Martinez, Ed Chufo, Joe Marshall, Terry Moore, Alan Nevin, Don Billings, Gary London, Jeff Lewin, Alex Rojas, and Stephanie Venti. I also want to thank our co-sponsor, the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, and our corporate sponsor, the CFA Society. We're also so grateful for the support of our table sponsors, Terry Moore, GAFCON, and Fenimore, as well as our individual sponsors, Alex Rojas and Jeff Lewin. So if any of you might be interested also in helping to support the roundtable, please get in touch with me and see what we could do about that. So, and now for today's event. You want to go ahead and see if we can get the screen seamlessly switched over. So Professor Betsey Stevenson teaches in the School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. Her academic research is in labor economics and public policy, and it's been very influential, as well as her very successful undergraduate textbook on principles of economics. She's also served as chief economist for the U.S. Department of Labor and on the board of directors of the rideshare company Lyft. So she knows firsthand how technological change is changing the nature of our work. So we're all watching in astonishment as generative AI is transforming so much of what we do. We're used to thinking of technological progress as something that's going to replace manual labor, and now it looks like it's starting to replace brain power. And how is how's the labor market going to adapt to that in general? And how are all of us here individually going to adapt to these changes? So glad to have Professor Betsey Stevenson help us think about these issues.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about what I see coming in terms of the labor market evolution. And what I want to do is learn a little bit from the past, as well as some of the experiments that we are already starting to learn from. So I called this AI will cause jobs to evolve. Will you be able to evolve with it? Because I think, first of all, one of the big mistakes people make is they think immediately about jobs being eliminated. But in reality, in the history of change, what tends to happen is jobs evolve. Now, if you take a job and you go 50 years forward, the job might even have the same title, but it doesn't look at all the same. So it can evolve to the point of effective elimination, but that is a process, not a moment. So I've been working on AI, going to AI things and trying to see how AI is changing things for really about the last 10 years. And it always really starts with this two competing extreme visions. One is like doomsday, machines could destroy our lives. And, you know, that's one of the fears. And that fear, I think, is also heating up now. And you've got potential legislation, I think was just vetoed here in California, that requires kill switches because they're sort of worried about what could happen. But now, on the other hand, there are, you know, people who really believe that we're at the dawn of a utopia where machines will allow a quality of life previously only had by the very elite. I was recently at a conference that brought technologists and economists together. And what was interesting to me is the technologists are fighting about these two visions. Which one is it going to be? And the economists think we're going to be in the muck of the middle for quite some time. So let me give you some examples of transformations. You've witnessed a transformation over your own lifetime. The US doesn't really make stuff anymore. This is jobs in the United States between 1940 and today. And all I'm showing you is the number of jobs in the goods producing sector versus the service sector. And what you'll see is that we basically have as many people making stuff today as we had 80 years ago. Why have we not grown that sector? It's not, despite what you hear from politicians, all about trade. A lot of it has to do with technology. We just don't need as many people to make the same amount of stuff. So when I wanted to show you that to give you something to grab hold of when you think about this idea, which is what could happen to employment. So we could have technology displacing workers through technological unemployment because fewer people are needed to produce the same amount of stuff, and the demand for stuff doesn't increase enough to offset the displacement. Or we could have automation creating productivity gains that lead to price decreases, which increase market demand and the scale of production sufficiently to offset the displacement. Okay, this is like the stuff I teach my students about how do we think about how technological change increases employment. Does stuff become so cheap we get to make so much more of it that even though there are fewer workers needed per item made, we still hire more workers because we're making so much more? Or, yeah, we're making more, but we still not enough to hire more workers. It's really going to depend on the scale we're talking about. Are we talking about your company? Are we talking about your industry? Are we talking about your region, San Diego? Are we talking about the United States? Or are we talking about the globe? If you want to think about that, wrap your head around that, think about agriculture. So agriculture has become a shrinking industry because we've become so much more productive. So here's something, I took it from Migration Dialogue from UC Davis using global data. And it just makes this point that we have fewer of the world's people are working in food today than just even 20 years ago. And that means that, you know, technology has meant something that I think most of us think is good. We don't all have to spend our day trying to grow our food. We can actually do other things. And that I think is at its heart, the utopia vision of AI. So now let's dig into AI more specifically. So I want you to take a look at and think about how AI can change work. And to do that, I want to show you a couple of studies, and then we're gonna add it up and think about the macroeconomics of AI, like how fast could this transform things? And I'll give you a little hint. At that conference I was at, the technologists we were all asked, like, how much will GDP have grown in 20 years due to AI? And what will the annual growth rate have averaged over the next 20 years given AI? And the economists said, well, I guess it might go from 2 to 2.5% a year. And the technologists had numbers like 500% a year. So we're going to do some math so that I can just show you that they're crazy. So then we're going to talk about the political economy of AI, the distribution stuff, dividing the pie. And actually, it's something I think a lot about with my rideshare hat on, and in trying to think about how has rideshare changed things and what will happen when we get autonomous vehicles. And then I'll end with thinking about how you should be adapting now. So let's turn to those 3 business case studies and an insight into innovation. So let's start with a study that gave access to an AI coding assistant to allow coders to complete their task using that assistant. And what they found is the treatment group who had GitHub Copilot was much faster than the control group who had the internet but no AI. So these the coders completed their task 56% faster. One important part of this study was it was the low performers who had the improvement, not the high performers. The high performers had very little improvement. A second study led had ChatGPT led office workers to do professional writing tasks 40% faster. So this is also, I should say, more, what they did was they took white-collar workers who were assigned tasks, such as writing press releases, short reports, analysis plans, emails, and they were paid for producing quality work. The randomly assigned treatment group was instructed to sign up for ChatGPT 3.5, while the control group was not. They did do a little bit of care to make sure, to see if the control group was using ChatGPT 3.5. But they didn't necessarily prevent it, but I should say that that would actually just lead them to find no effect. There was no way to fully prevent it. The control group took not quite twice as long, but so the treatment group was 40% faster. Personally, I'm just going to tell you, this is my own experience, that sometimes it feels like too much effort to use AI. I'm like, oh, it's going to be so much work, because you have to get the prompts right. You have to engage with the AI right. But then when I do it, I'm actually amazed at how much faster it actually does lead me to complete. And so, the trick though, is that you have to know what you're doing. So keep in mind that these studies didn't train them how to use ChatGPT better. So this is given what people currently know. And I will tell you that I use ChatGPT better today than I did a month ago. And so in some sense, these are only the tip of the iceberg. Now, I want to go to one more study, which was done in a real world customer service company. And they convinced the company to let them randomize whether technical support staff were provided an AI assistant that provided suggested responses, which they could use or ignore. So basically, like, they're chatting with a customer and the AI is like, you could say this, and they could be like, listen to AI, that's gonna really annoy that person, I'm not gonna say that. Or they could go ahead and just post that in. And what they found, and they had a control group that used the regular workflow and didn't have access to this AI. So they found that customer staff, service staff were able to resolve issues 14% faster using their tool. Again, I would say this is a real life setting. I do wonder whether as the tool gets better, you could see better effects. But 14% improvement in productivity in a real company is quite astonishing. And again, I should note that it almost entirely came from making their their least productive workers more productive. So the studies so far have not found that the best workers get better with access to AI, but the least productive workers come closer to their best workers when they have access to AI. That's going to tell us something really important about how we think AI might change and shape inequality. So often people say, well, the thing about AI is it's just not that creative. We're still going to need human creativity. And you know, I certainly have believed that when people say, like, what are you doing to help your kids in this new AI world? I'm like, I put them in musical theater. I mean, come on, you got to think on your feet. You got to sing on your feet. It's got to be good for them, right? It's making them creative and responsive. But then there was the most depressing study, which was done at Wharton, where they had MBA students come up with innovative ideas, and then they also asked AI to come up with innovative ideas. So create an idea for a new physical product for the college student market that would be likely to retail for less than $50 that doesn't exist and people might want to buy. Unfortunately, the AIs had better ideas than the Wharton students. On average, so not every AI idea beat every Wharton student idea, but on average, the AI came up with more new product ideas. So in some sense, this is not surprising because what AI is doing is making combinations. And so it'll come up with combinations that we just have never thought of, but they've got it sees all the pieces and it says, well, why don't we combine these things? And so that, I still think of that kind of creativity as slightly different. But you know, but maybe not. I don't have a study on this, but you know, there's another aspect. Well, maybe the AI, maybe humans will be more empathetic. And I actually wrote a column about this recently that, you know, we're going to have to dive into our humanity to compete with the bots. The bots are more patient than we are as people. And unfortunately, I find myself getting irritated when my students keep asking me the same dumb question because I have taught you this so many times already. Whoops, I'm not supposed to respond that way. The AI tutor never responds that way. The AI tutor says, let's do it again. So I was demonstrating the AI Socratic tutor that's part of my textbook to some students, and I purposely said something that was really not good economics into the tutor, like maybe this is the case, and it said interesting, and my students cracked up, right? That was its response. The bot was interesting, and then it asked a question to try to move me away from this idea that was interesting because of its incorrectness. And I was reminded that you're supposed to be positive even in the face of frustration. So here, I should have clicked on this to show you the best ideas of the bot were better. The average idea was better. So what's different about the labor market effects of AI? This comes from the book or paper by Bailey, Brynjolfsson, and Koenig, Machines of the Mind. And the quote is, unlike most advances in automation in the past, it's a machine of the mind affecting cognitive work. It's still a tool, just like a steam engine was a tool, just like electricity provides tools. But now this tool isn't replacing our physical strength, it's replacing our intellectual strength. economists believe in the potential for large gains. So I'm showing you the full answers. And one of the things I love about this Chicago survey of expert economists is they ask them their response and then they ask them how confident they are in their response. So we can look at their response and then we can look at their responses weighted by each expert's confidence. And so when they're asked, the rising use of robots and artificial intelligence in advanced countries is likely to create benefits large enough that they could be used, could, not would, could be used to compensate those workers who are substantially negatively affected for their lost wages. Look, most economists say yes. That is, most economists believe in the utopia. The idea that AI will come along and free us from the drudgery of so much work. It will allow us to have higher living standards than we've ever had before. And that could be enough to benefit everybody. But they're really uncertain about who will get hurt. So when we then ask, use of artificial intelligence over the next 10 years will have a negative impact on the earnings potential of substantial numbers of high-skilled workers in advanced countries, all of a sudden you see that the modal answer is, I don't know, uncertain, right? Who's it gonna impact? And, you know, what do we mean by high-skilled? Personally, I think it's never been a better time to be Gen X. You guys have thought of us as the ignored generation forever, but we're young enough to use the new tools and power us to a future of higher earnings. I really think that the young people coming in who want to be the high-skilled workers, the ones who could have been the high-skilled workers, are going to start to see their pathways to these jobs becoming eliminated, reduced. Think about what's already happening in law firms. They don't need as many paralegals. They're bringing in AI to do the things that a junior associate or a paralegal once did. All my friends in their 50s who are lawyers began their legal career either as a paralegal before going to law school or as a grunt work junior associate straight out of law school. You know, if we make it so those partners find their job a lot easier, and they're a lot more productive, the question will be, does legal work grow enough that they need to be bringing in young people? And will those young people come in ready to jump ahead of the AI because they're not going to be able to learn on the job the way they used to? And that's why there's so much uncertainty about what this will mean for inequality and what kind of inequality. So the uncertainty is very high when it comes to whether AI will have a measurable impact on income inequality over the next 10 years. Okay, so which jobs are vulnerable to being automated by AI? So if we want to start to think about what's going to happen to our labor market, we have to ask ourselves, well, let's divide our jobs into they couldn't be affected, they could be affected, and they're somewhere along a spectrum. Here you can see that, you know, there are a bunch of jobs like athletes, cooks, dishwashers, floor layers, where at least as of now, we don't really know how AI is going to come in and have much of an impact on that job. And then there are jobs where 100% of the tasks could be automated, like copy editors, financial analysts, survey researchers, tax preparers. Now, I want you to realize when you look at these jobs where 100% of tasks can be automated, I want you to think about two things. One, it's that 100% of the tasks that people are doing currently. So remember I talked about jobs evolving, we think about, you know, when I was a little kid, the way my mom got cash and paid for things was we went on Saturday mornings and stood in line at the bank so that she could deposit my dad's paycheck and get cash for the week. And there were lots of people, it was always a long line. It's really annoying childhood memory. And there are all these tellers, and all the tellers did was take in checks and hand out cash. We have more tellers today than we've ever had before, but the tellers don't hand out cash very often anymore. So they have just very different jobs. So when I say 100% of the tasks can be automated, I'm talking about the tasks they have today. So it's possible they get new tasks. And then there are jobs like where some amount of the tasks could be affected. And so roughly 80% of US workers are in jobs where more than 10% of their tasks could be affected. And again, we could see this as potentially terrible or potentially great. Like, I love the idea of like 10% of my work could go away and I'm still producing the same amount of stuff. But then the question would be, does that mean 10% of the workers go away and we have massive unemployment? So we have to start then thinking about the distributional aspects of that. 50% of workers could have 50% of their tasks affected. So the bottom line is that AI is going to have an uneven effect across sectors. Office and admin support is where it's coming. AI is coming and coming very quickly for those kinds of jobs. And again, many of you have already lived through the movement away from people who typed for a living, right? So we had administrators who primarily, were about typing and managing documents, and that occupation has shrunk, but there are still administrative people, and in fact, they're better paid today because those administrative people often use software and do more advanced tasks than simply, typing something up. So we have big differences across sectors in terms of the share of work tasks that could potentially be automated. But what I want you to take from this is that, here, we're sort of looking at what share we're estimated today do we think could reasonably be automated. So given those numbers, let's turn to the macroeconomics. What would that mean? And so what I want to do is walk you through a paper by the amazing Doron Acemoglu, who looked at what he called the simple macroeconomics of AI. And his point was actually to, I think, largely mock the technologists who think that, double-digit GDP growth is just around the corner. So he starts with this number. Imagine AI could transform 20% of all tasks. AI is affecting a large share of the economy, but not all. So 20% of these tasks could be automated. Yeah, but they won't all be automated because you're only going to automate if it's cost effective, right? We've had automatic weaving looms for a very long time, and there are still people in countries hand looming carpets. Why? Because the labor is cheaper than the machine. So, this is how do economists think about whether a task is going to get automated? You have to think about the marginal cost of having the worker do it and the marginal cost of having capital do it. So Doron says, well, maybe 23% of these tasks could be cost effectively automated. And then that leaves us with 4.6% of tasks done by AI. That still sounds pretty big, right? 4.6% of tasks done by AI. But it's not like AI makes it free. Automating a task yields about a 27% labor savings. Okay, so that's a 1.2% reduction in labor costs. Labor only accounts for 53% of costs in business and the economy. So this gives us a 0.66% reduction in production costs. Economists call this a rise in total factor productivity. Don't get me wrong, like I'm not going to sniff at a 0.66% rise in total factor productivity. That's great. We want that. So let's then, we get some capital deepening. We get the proportionate 0.66% increase in capital investments. The capital output ratio is 0.73. We put this all together and AI gives us a 1.1% rise in GDP over the next decade. Not exactly transformative over the next decade, but maybe we're not being fair. Maybe it's 25% of tasks instead of 20. And maybe AI, the price is falling so fast that all of these tasks can be cost effectively automated. And maybe people learn how to use the the automation better. So 27% labor savings is also too conservative. So let's turn that into a 36% labor saving. What does the math get us? 8% rise in GDP over the next decade. Now look at 8% increase in our living standards over the next decade coming solely from AI is pretty good. So I'd be pretty happy with that. But I think that that's worth thinking about why we don't think it's all gonna change overnight. And why? Well, like what's missing when people talk about this? Well, so first of all, actually, so let me say, this 8%, this is sort of static. This is imagining that we all keep doing what we're currently doing. And so this also may be too conservative when we think about what's missing. So, you know, tech revolutions reallocate workers to new and productive jobs, things we haven't always thought about, right? And so, you know, if I was able to bring my grandmother back to this earth for one more conversation with her, and I was to tell her, Grandma, that job that saved your family during the Depression, when you went from the rural area to Buffalo and got a job as a secretary and you typed things and took dictation, that doesn't exist anymore. But my dog sees a psychologist. I think she'd go running back into her grave. So, you know, it's hard for us to imagine the ways in which our jobs in society changes. So some occupations shrink, and I already showed you farming has shrunk on a local scale and on a global scale. Operative and kindred workers, laborers, salesmen is a shrinking job, sales people. Farm laborers, private household workers, bookkeepers, mine operatives, deliverymen. These are jobs that have shrunk between 1940 and 2020. It's interesting because you see the tiny shrink in deliverymen and routemen between 1940 and 2020. It's a bigger shrink if you go 1940 to 1990, because then we turn around and we get all this like online shopping that starts to save that occupation or change it. But it's a very different occupation now. Some occupations really grew, like managers, clerical workers, teachers, nurses. Essentially in the United States, the occupations that have grown the most are in health and education services and business and professional services. But we also got brand new occupations. While I don't have pet psychologist on here, that is, or app creator, or the occupations my kids see, like YouTuber, you do see that we've seen new occupations that really didn't exist in 1940, including cashiers, medical and dental technicians, accountants and auditors, personnel and labor relations workers, taxi drivers and chauffeurs. So the new occupations are what I think we have the hardest time forecasting. And so if AI could raise the productivity of innovators by 20%, it could raise output growth from a 2% baseline to a 2.4%, which, you know, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this talk, I think economists are very optimistic about AI, and I'm one of them, think that's probably true. It's the technologists poo-poo how small we think that is, but I want you to look at how that compounds over time. What that would mean for the living standards of your grandchildren and their children. If AI boosts innovation, we could end up with GDP, just taking innovation so that we go from a 2% baseline to a 2.4% baseline. We could end up with the baseline being 30%, or the innovation being 30% higher by 2060 than it would be with the baseline without AI. So, Daron is the pessimist here, who estimates the effects of AI on GDP at 1% over in 10 years' time. You got PwC is the optimist. They think 21%. I probably will tell you, I'd put myself somewhere between Daron and JP Morgan. The average here is 12%. But again, I tend to think that things happen a little bit slower than a lot of people expect. So how transformative will it be? Is it going to be just another innovation or utterly transformative? They said the economists are here, the technologists are there. I am on the side of the economists, and the thing that I always remind the technologists of is major innovations don't often deliver productivity growth until work has been reorganized around them. And that takes a really, really long time. So if you want to understand, like, is AI going to really transform our work? People had light bulbs and they didn't bother changing their factories to have light. And I will say my hotel room was really dark this morning and I was like, I cannot stand to operate in the dark. But, I hadn't gotten used to living in a world without electricity. And there were lots of companies that were like retooling our entire factory to have this electricity business, our entire office to have this electricity thing is not worth it. When I started, when I graduated from my undergraduate degree, the solo paradox, we could see computers everywhere, but in the productivity statistics, was the big organizing theme. Why? Because the computers were on all the desks, but the productivity hadn't changed. And personally, I think we're going to see the AI on all the desks long before we see the productivity changing. And then a half century of capital accumulation and wage stagnation to kick off the Industrial Revolution. And I think about this period for historians out there, it's called Engel's Pause, 50 years of wage stagnation after we invented the steam engine that made people really angry. And if you want to remind yourself what a period like that feels like, go back and read some Charles Dickens. And that's where I think we're, we have to think about how people react to these new technologies, how they react to the transformation, and how long it can take us to actually do something that puts everybody to their best possible use, right? It's not that our farms didn't become more productive. It was that we didn't know what to do with the people who used to work on the farms. We didn't know how to reallocate all of our capital, human and physical, to take advantage of the new technology. And I think that's the thing that's going to take much, much longer than any technologists believe. So, it is true that adopting AI is simpler. Software is not physical. APIs are modular and connected. It uses natural language. But there are chip shortages. There are energy bottlenecks. There's potential for regulation. And there's also just humans are not really good at change. Remarkably few US businesses have adopted AI. This was a survey done by the census in late 2023. So, and what you saw was 3.9% of businesses had adopted AI and only 2.6 plan to adopt within the next 6 months. So I would be shocked if you saw more than, about 6% have adopted at this point, right? Because that's even if most of those who planned had done so. So what is this? What's the political economy of this? Well, I want you to think about the disruption for a minute as an ownership problem. Imagine that you own a robot that can do all the work for you. Are you better off? Yes. Is your boss better off? No, right? So if you're at home using your AI and you're a lot more productive and then you're like logging off early, catching more time for yourself, that's great. Imagine that your employer owns the robot that can do all of your work for you. Are you better off? No. Is your boss better off? Yes. So like a major problem here is the ownership problem. And I've been thinking about this from a rideshare perspective for long before I joined the board of Lyft. which is, I had a talk once with a rideshare driver who spent the entire ride telling me how horrible autonomous vehicles are and how they should never be used, and we should just, as a government right now, ban them because it's just a terrible, terrible thing. And at the end of his whole rant, I said to him, come on, if you owned an autonomous vehicle and you could send it out to get people for you while you stayed at home and just monitored that your autonomous car was doing the right thing, you don't think that'd be kind of cool? And his eyes widened. He's like, I never thought about me owning the autonomous vehicle and it working for me. His problem was he was stuck in a frame of, I'm gonna lose my job, I'm gonna be made redundant, and Elon Musk is gonna own all the vehicles. These are very different models. Who owns the capital? Who gets to put their capital to work for them? So there is an ownership problem that I think we have to address as a society. So it's not a robot problem or an AI problem, it's an ownership problem. We also need to think about the disruption as a potential competition problem. Imagine that OpenAI, Google, Facebook, and many other competitors, each owning competing AI models, can do all your work. Are you better off? No. Is your boss better off? Yes. Imagine that a monopoly AI company owns an AI model that can do all of your work. Are you better off? No. Is your boss better off? No. Is the monopolist better off? Yes. So we don't necessarily have an AI problem, but we might have a competition problem. That's actually one of the things I think very hard about, is that regulation could actually make things worse by giving us a bigger competition problem. And it's probably one of the things economists are most fearful about with the wrong kind of regulation. And the reason is that the regulators don't know much about AI, and the existing companies are happy to help them write the regulation. And we know that when existing companies write regulation, one of the things they like to do is make sure that regulation keeps new competitors out. I wanted to end on the 3 stages of the AI roller coaster that I think most people go through. This can do my job. This can do my job. They took my job. Working together can help me do a better job, right? So we're all sort of overwhelmed, then a little angry. We just have to get to that part where we realize it's a tool, it's a friend, it can make things better. So AI will displace some workers. AI will augment other workers. We need to understand the opportunity from computer code to AI. What is the use for tacit knowledge, right? Previously could only be gained through lived experience. AI can infer instructions from examples. And that's a conversation I was just having, how does AI learn how people might make mistakes to be a good Socratic tutor? And it can do this even when sort of no instructions exist, but from its own experience. At the end, AI might reduce the total number of jobs. And I will just bring you back to Thoreau, who said, the mass of men live lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. Unconscious despair is concealed even when under what are called the games and amusements of mankind. There's no play in them, for it's all coming after work. So reducing work in and of itself is not a bad thing. Americans tend to be a little allergic to it, right? We're the only advanced country that doesn't really have vacation. But it turns out that it might be good for our mental health. And we do need to be pushing our students, our children, our workers into investing in new skills wisely. The skills we need are science and critical thinking skills, decision-making skills, not computational skills. AI can compute really well, but you need the judgment to know when the AI's made an error or when the AI needs to go in a different direction. Instead of focusing on shortcomings, I think you should learn to help AI succeed. AI does have a lot of mistakes. We discussed this morning. AI makes simple math errors, but you can say, check your answer in Python. You can ask AI to check its own work. People say, well, their responses are formulaic. You can ask it to sharpen the response or write like Hemingway. A lot of this is in the instructions. AI hallucinates. You could set that temperature to 0 so it hallucinates less if you want. So what I do, and I recommend for all of you, is to expand your uses. Make sure you're using it. Edit your writing. Ask it what it would to name a company. I'll tell you, my teen daughter, when she's emailing her teachers, feeds the email into ChatGPT and says, give me a subject line, because she hates writing the summary. One of the things that I use it for is I just fed back in 100 students written feedback about what's going well and what they would like to see me improve for my class. And I said, ChatGPT, take this, 5 documents of written text and give me 3 bullet points of what's going well and what I need to improve on. And then it did. And I said, that's helpful. Could you turn that into a PowerPoint slide, please? And then it did. Actually, I said, can you turn it into 2 PowerPoint slides, one emphasizing the positive, the others emphasizing the areas for improvement. And then it did. And then I downloaded it and I put it in my slides. And I said, you gave me this feedback. Look. So that's, there's lots of different ways it can expand and it can contract. So it can extract data from a chart. I urge you to experiment with it because it is going to make big changes and you want to make sure that you are evolving as the AI evolves. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for a fantastic talk. We have time for a few questions. If you would, please raise your hand and wait till Jay brings you the microphone so everybody can hear. And I'll let you handle it.